Good day, everyone. Welcome to another Live with Kevin on a Monday. You may have been here before, and if so, welcome back. And if you're watching live, I know that some of you, whichever channel you're watching this on, might not be live, but if you're live, go to the comments, say hello, tell us who you are, where you're from. We'd love to know that. We'll get to introducing our guest in a second. I'm so glad that you're here, wherever you are located. While you're here, as we have this conversation for a few minutes about culture, I want you to imagine that you're joining my guests and I for a cup of coffee. So ask your questions, share your comments, share your ideas, because all that will make for a better conversation. And then you will really be a part of that conversation. I hope you'll do that. But before I introduce my guests today, you might have previously joined me in this spot for a live version of what would become a podcast on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, but that's not what this is. This conversation today is with two experts who have joined me in the past for something we call Virtual LeaderCon, and will be with us in just a few weeks for this year's Virtual LeaderCon, which is the premier virtual leadership conference, and this year featuring over 30 experts across 4 days. I'll tell you more about Virtual LeaderCon later, but if you're already curious, you can go to virtualleadercon.com to learn more. So what are we talking about today? Today, we're talking about organizational culture. We're talking about why it's important and how you can create it. We're doing that with two of the top thought leaders in this arena. If you care about your culture, but don't think you can change it because of where you sit in the organization, or if you're not sure why you should care about culture, wherever you sit, you're in the right place, regardless of which of those things is you. And so I want to welcome you to a very special preview of Virtual LeaderCon with my two guests and my friends that I've never actually met. And there they are, Karin and David Dye, although they're flipped from that as you look at them. Let me introduce them. You can figure out which one is who, I think. Let me introduce them both to you. Karin and David Dye help leaders achieve breakthrough results without losing their soul. They are keynote speakers, trainers, and award-winning authors of Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates, and Winning Well, a manager's guide to getting results without losing your soul. Karin is a top leadership consultant and CEO of Let's Grow Leaders. A former Verizon wireless executive. She was named to Inc. magazine's list of great leadership speakers, a list I also am proud to be on with her. And David Dye, a former executive, elected official, and the president of Let's Grow Leaders, the leadership training and consulting firm that they co-own. They were a part of the first Virtual LeaderCon that we did in 2020, but they were with us on a recording. This year, they'll be joining me live just as they are today. And so you can already mark your calendars for 2:15 Eastern time on Wednesday, September 14th, when they'll be joining us. But for now, they're with us live. Welcome, you guys. Glad to have you from your Colorado home. Glad that you're here.
Kevin, thank you so very much for having us. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and it's exciting to see people joining from India and Michigan and Southern California. I hope they'll chat in their questions and comments.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll have others joining us as well. So the book, the more recent book that came out during COVID, that's a whole other conversation, is called Courageous Cultures. And so before we do anything else, since I sort of promised we're going to talk about culture, define culture. One of you, tell us, when you think about that word, what does it mean?
You know, our favorite definition of culture comes from the marketing guru, Seth Godin. And he says, culture is simply people like us do things like this. And in a courageous culture, people like us speak up. They come to work asking, how can we do this better? They're sharing ideas. There is a foundation of psychological safety, and people are encouraging one another to collaborate up, down, and sideways.
All right, so let's just talk about psychological safety. It was on my list.
Okay.
Since you mentioned the word, let's just go there. That, you know, if I were to make a list of the top 10 words that people like us, authors, speakers, that are using these days, one of them would be culture, another one would be psychological safety. So what is the role? And I know that you guys spend a lot of time talking about courageous cultures, but with culture in general, what's the role that psychological safety plays there, and what should we as leaders be thinking about as it relates to psychological safety?
You know, in every team, there is not one of us that's smart enough to be coming up with all the answers, all the solutions, all the innovations that any of us need. No leader, no CEO, no one. And so to get them, we need everybody contributing. Well, how does that happen? It happens in an environment of trust and psychological safety, where people feel safe to question, to challenge, to raise an issue, and not have to worry about somebody shooting the messenger. At a base level, at the level of a team, any kind of group of people, that's where psychological safety exists. And that's why it's so critical. If we have a culture that is predetermined to draw out the best thinking, the best ideas, and get people really problem solving together, everything else becomes easier.
You know, Dr. Amy Edmondson of Harvard, really the pioneer of psychological safety, wrote the foreword to our book. And she talks about psychological safety and courage being really two sides of the same coin, right? You need people having the courage to speak up, to share ideas, but you also need leaders creating a psychologically safe environment where it doesn't take daily courage to speak up. It's just what
it doesn't take like courage, right? You know, I mean, and here's the thing: if you know, speaking as a leader, if someone is courageous enough, it gives me the chance to prove that it's safe to do it. Like it is two sides of the same coin, because if I've lived in an organization, if I'm an individual contributor, if I'm a teammate, if I've lived in an organization where it was never safe, until I see that it is, I just assume it isn't, right? So I love that idea, Amy's idea of it being two sides of the same coin.
You know, Kevin, it's really interesting when we were doing, so that we did a bunch of quantitative research for Courageous Cultures, but we also did a lot of qualitative interviews. And it was interesting when people were telling us they were reluctant to speak up or share their ideas. One of the times we would say, well, what happened and when was it? And a lot of times they'll say, well, it wasn't really at this company. And it was 10 years ago, but I'm never doing that again, right? And so people are holding on to these negative experiences. Even if you're the most human-centered leader, really encouraging people, it's statistically likely people are holding on to some stuff from the past that you've got to overcome.
There's no, that's so true. That's so true. And so I love that conversation about it being on both sides. One of the things that you talk about, if we were to continue our list of overused words, we would say organizational change, and it would be on that list. And I think we all would agree that, you know, over the last couple of years, there's been massive change in all sorts of areas of organizational life and life in general. And so one of the things that I love about the Courageous Cultures book is you got the chapter where you talk about the infrastructure for change. And I know we can't unpack that all the way, but organizations are living through change. Our cultures are going to adjust through all that. Talk to us a little bit about this idea of an infrastructure that's going to help us related to change.
You know, part of it starts with the asking. So when you ask people about new ideas and how often they're asked for their ideas, 49% of people in the research said, yeah, my leader never asks for ideas. I'm not regularly asked for ideas. And so part of that infrastructure is creating an ongoing practice as a leader of asking for ideas where you really need them. So, you know, you're talking about the change that, you know, the whole bag, all the playing tiles have been shaken up through the pandemic. And now what do organizations do is are we hybrid? Are we coming back to the office? Are we staying remote? What are we doing? Well, you got all those tiles shaken up. If we can get a consistent practice of asking for people's ideas around how to solve for what as leaders we know are the most important outcomes, gosh, what can we do? So that's just one example of part of that infrastructure.
Yeah, when you think about an infrastructure, you know, what you're saying is you could have local leaders creating cultural oases where they're asking people for their ideas. But if your HR systems and processes are not supporting that. And so that's when you think about infrastructure. When we're working with our clients at a systemic level, sure, we're training leaders, but we're also looking at how are you onboarding? How are you recruiting? What are your HR policies? Of course, a big one right now, infrastructure, is work from home policies, right? That's all part of your infrastructure. And you have to think about all of the elements of that because you can do good with one and create psychological safety and undermine it with something else, right, at the same time.
We see that so often where a CEO or senior leaders will say, we really want ideas. And then you look at some of the systems, they're actually working against it with recognition, with what's being rewarded.
And even back to your point earlier, Karin, even if someone really wants to believe that CEO or that whatever leader that is, if the systems prove otherwise, say, yep, it's really no different than where I was 5 years ago, and it's not any safer here, and all those other things, right? David, you were talking about questions, and I'm thinking about even in this moment where we are gathered virtually, but so are all of our listeners, watchers here. And the culture we're trying to create here is for you to ask your questions. So feel free to ask your questions. Please. And David and Karin and I were talking about this before we went live about Virtual LeaderCon, because when they were with us before, they weren't there live. So we couldn't tape their questions. They couldn't be interacting in the same way that they will be in a few weeks. And so our platform there is different than this, but it doesn't matter what the platform is. It doesn't matter what the organizational situation is. If we want more questions, we have to, as leaders, be asking for them, encouraging them, answering them when we get them, et cetera, et cetera. So if you all have questions, feel free to ask. Karin and David are really smart. They'll answer any question you've got.
We love
So you know, we are in a similar boat. We were finishing a book at the start of the pandemic, and you had a book. This book came out, I think, in like July or August.
Yeah. Good memory.
Right. Of 2020, the pandemic year.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question I'll ask is, so I'll ask two questions related to that. The first one is, what have you learned since the book came out, pandemic or not? Like what are the lessons that you've learned that maybe aren't in the book about culture that you might share?
Yeah. Do you want to go? So, you know, interestingly, we could not have predicted that, you know, that this book, what we were landing into when we created it. And of course, you're really worried about, is it going to still be relevant? The whole world has just changed. But what we have found is these tools have become so more critical than ever before. And, you know, we have had so many companies call us and say, this right here, we've got to do this now, and we've got to do it at every level of our organization. And I would say the thing that we really learned the most is how important creating clarity is during this time. So in the book, we talk about this elegant dance between clarity and curiosity. You need to be really clear that you want people's ideas, but you need to be strategically clear about what kinds of ideas you need. People need to understand where you're headed directionally. Otherwise, they're going to bring you all kinds of wild and crazy things, and you're going to be like, I don't need all these ideas. Just stop, right? It's the wild, wild west. But then you also need this curiosity to show up, because you don't have all the answers. And particularly when the whole world is shifting, you really don't have all the answers. And so, you know, in times of radical uncertainty and change, it's really easy to say, well, we don't have clarity. And, you know, what we really are encouraging people to say is not everything is unclear. So get really clear about what's not changing. Your values aren't changing. Your clients aren't changing. The need to connect at a human level and it's not changing. So be really clear about that, and then show up curious about what do we need to do next, and make it easy for people to contribute to that. And so I guess, you know, we believed it in the book, but what we've seen as it's played out is that the more uncertain times get, the more you need these tools.
Yeah. So you partially answered the next thing I wanted to ask you, but say a little bit more about this. Like, you were talking about courage and culture before, right? Before you wrote, or as you were writing the book.
Yeah.
What are the questions? How are the questions you're getting different now? Like, how has our collective experience of the pandemic changed the nature of the questions you're getting about culture?
Mm-hmm.
There are several that come to mind. One of them is there's this egalitarianism that when we wrote the book, we really wrote it for senior leaders who are wanting to create a culture. And if we have had a strain of questions that has risen to the forefront, it's from people at every level of every team, every organization who are, how do I do this? I want to build this on my team. So as an individual contributor, as a frontline team leader, as a middle level manager, how do I create this kind of culture? And how do I do that in a real way? Because it's easy to ask the questions. It's easy to start facilitating that. And then, but what I do with that can be more challenging. So That's one aspect.
Another one, and I know we were chatting before the show, you're getting this one all the time too, is do we need to be in person to have if we were once in person all the time, what is our new normal for this and why? And should I mandate people to be in person some of the time? If we're going to have an office occasional environment, what are the occasions that we should be together? How do we work asynchronously and synchronously? One of our global clients is really, really wrestling with this. He's got team members all over the world. He had flown them all in for a meeting. We were there. We were talking about their biggest problems, and they said, "You know what our biggest problem is? There is actually only 1 hour of the day that it is a reasonable expectation for me to think we could all be on a call, and that reasonable expectation includes 8 o'clock at night for some of the team members."
Yeah,
right?
it's reasonable, but it's not exactly optimal for
Right.
many of them, right?
And so how do we, and I'm scratching my head on like this is that's a very big question with a very complicated answer, right? And so those are the kinds of questions, because I think as people have throughout the pandemic, the globalization of many teams, and they're like, well, I don't really need them sitting in Salt Lake City, Utah anymore. I can bring in somebody from India and the Philippines, and yes, that's awesome, and it also creates this complexity. And so that's what we're really working with a lot of our clients on, those kinds of questions right now.
And one of those questions that comes up in that context so often is about culture. And there's an assumption of, gosh, I don't know if I can create culture when I have a remote or hybrid workforce. Well, you can. You have a culture.
You already got one.
It's
Too late. You already got one, right?
And you always have a culture. People like us do things like this. And so what are those things, and how do you get intentional about them? It's different depending on your modality.
Yeah, 100%. That I think is one of the things that we've heard the most is like, okay, we need people to come back. Stated a different way, David. We need people to come back so we can maintain our culture. I'm like, no, you don't. You had one. There are 3 cultures to think about right now: the one you had, the one you got, and the one you want.
Yes.
And that's really, I think, where we need to go. The other interesting thing, Karin, to your point about the 1 hour, right, is that in the last 2 years, there's not been an hour on the clock of 24 that I have not been sitting here working with a group. Now, not every day. Like, I haven't done 24 straight hours, but there's not been, pick a time, 2:30 a.m., 7 p.m., 3 a.m. It doesn't matter. Like, there's not been a time I haven't been here at least once being with a group when it was the right time for them. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a real issue, right? It's a real opportunity. I mean, you're bringing your team together this week for the first time all together. And so, and they're spread out. They're not across the world, but they're across the United States, right? So it's a very real thing. So you asked a great question, David, and I'm going to make you answer it. You said people are asking, I'm a frontline leader. I'm an individual teammate, right? Like, what do I do? I like these ideas, but just about culture in general, like, what's your advice to them? And many of the people who are with us right now, I'm not a CEO. I'm not the senior leadership team. So what's our role? What can we be doing?
It's one of our favorite questions because it's fundamentally a leadership question, regardless of whatever your title or role is. As a leader, how do you influence the world, the people around you, and create a better tomorrow? So we're huge fans of what we call a cultural oasis. Whatever larger entity you're a part of, you are responsible for the culture you're creating around you. And so how are you interacting with your teammates or with your team? Are you asking questions? Are you genuinely listening? Are you what we call respond with regard, gratitude, adding information, inviting them to continue thinking? Are you clear about what success looks like? Are you asking those questions? And then are you contributing your own ideas in a meaningful way? We've got an idea model to let people do that. All of those are very practical. I can start that today. And if I do that consistently with my team or with my teammates, we're building a culture there, and results by freedom. You can start spreading that over time.
Anything you want to add to that, Karin?
Well, it's been interesting. We've been really working to break this down for teams. So if you had 1 hour a month, what is the conversation that you need to have to create a great team culture? And, it starts with first hour, what is your team vision? And we even have people draw a picture of the team as you see it now and the team as you'd like it to be. and then have a conversation around that. All right, well, right now we've got all these pictures of houses on fire and, people throwing things out the window. And then, what we would like to be is like a pleasant and the sunshine and the flowers and the dog in the yard. All right, what do you mean by that? What does that actually look like in terms of behaviors? All right, how are we going to get there? And then so that's just an hour conversation. The next month, all right, let's have a conversation about what are our most important strategic priorities. Because this scorecard says there's 27 things that are important. Let's pick 3. Right?
Which is impossible, by the way.
Which is impossible. And so, just really scaffolding people to have those, just an hour a month to really accelerate their team's performance can really make a big difference.
And one last element of that is, are we talking about how we're talking? Communicating about how we communicate. It's one of the most important conversations that every team can be having right now.
And as I wrote on my blog this morning, the most important skill, communication, is more complex than ever for a variety of reasons. And the remote or hybrid or globalized piece of that is only one of the reasons, but it's certainly one of the reasons.
Right.
So obviously, we're hoping people will come back and join the 3 of us and a lot of learners from around the world at Virtual LeaderCon, September 12th through 15th, specifically for you guys to join us on the 14th. But beyond that, and so everybody, real quick, because I don't think I said this, everybody, you can join Virtual LeaderCon for free. Listen to all of it live for free. And if you want to see something you're going to miss or you want it again, there's a way for you to invest to buy the lifetime access to the recordings. And in fact, Karin and David are a part of Wednesday, which is that whole day is going to be about culture. And so I'm super excited. We're going to spend a whole day. David, we're going to spend all day Tuesday on communication. We're going to spend all day Wednesday on culture. And of course, the other 2 days on a variety of topics as well. So virtualleadercon.com. But where can people learn more about you guys and your work? Where do you want to point people now?
Yeah. So our website is letsgrowleaders.com. And look at you. You're all prepared. And of course, we'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn as well. We write a blog also like you. David has a podcast called Leadership Without Losing Your Soul. I do Asking for a Friend, which you've been a guest on. And we just decided to do that again. So that'll be fun. And so letsgrowleaders.com. And our book is Courageous Cultures.
Courageous Cultures. Letsgrowleaders.com. You can do that. Now I have a question for all of you before we finish this. The question I always ask in this setting, and that is, now what? What are you going to do with this? Obviously, we hope you go buy a copy of this book. We also hope that you go sign up for Virtual LeaderCon to join for 1 or more sessions, 1 or more days, and certainly to come back and hear a more extended conversation and a more interactive conversation with David and Karin. But in terms of what we've talked about today, the question is, what will you do with what you learned today? Because if all you do is take this as, oh, that was interesting, oh, that was good, and do nothing else, then it was kind of a waste of your time. So you probably have something else on your list that would have added more value. The question here is, what are you going to do with what you learned? And there's lots of things that you might take from this. Maybe it's one of the last things that Karin said about thinking about, what could I do with my team in 1 hour this month to have a conversation that could start to change our culture, think about it differently. Maybe the question, it could be any number of things that we talked about today. Pick one, start there. And if you'll do that, this will have been an absolute good use, wonderful use of your time. So Karin and David and Karin, thank you both for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in about a month.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. It's always good to talk with you, Kevin. Thanks so much.
And everybody, again, this has been a preview, a short preview. Who knows what questions I will ask Karin and David when we're together in a month? Who knows where that conversation will lead us? But if you found this valuable, I promise that there will be not just the 2 of them, but 30 other folks that you will get great value from by joining us for Virtual LeaderCon. There's 100 reasons that you should attend. All you need is one, and it's all free. Join us, virtualleadercon.com, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks again, David and Karin.
Bye.